It's from the fucking Bible, right? Love of money is the root of all evil. And this is what you'll see. It will be the middle class's love of money and of wealth, which will lead to the destruction of their wealth, because they need the poor to protect them from the very rich. But they are trying to ally with the very rich, because when they hear people like me say tax wealth, they're like, oh my God, I've just renovated my kitchen. You know what I mean? Let go of your kitchen, mate. Forget about it. Help us protect ourselves from the real threat, which is the Mongol horde on the fucking horizon, which is the fucking centibillionaires and the trillionaires. They will take everything. That's basic maths. And if you allow them to take everything, that means you have nothing. And they they don't like people like me because, I'm telling them they're the fucking bad guys. You know what I mean? But, it's not about good guys and bad guys. It's about, are you fucking smart enough to protect your fucking wealth?
I first met today's guest on this show 4 years ago in 2022. Back then, very few people had heard of him. He had a YouTube channel. It wasn't very big. He was writing a book, but nobody was really sure if it was actually going to be worth reading. Since then, a lot has changed. Slight understatement. His book, The Trading Game, was a Sunday Times bestseller, out in hardback, also in paperback. That's when it did really well. As a paperback, it flew. And he's so influential. He's so of the zeitgeist. He's even taken over this week's edition of The Big Issue. Gary Says Wealth Tax, guest editor Gary Stevenson. So he's gone from someone you probably haven't heard of, a marginal influencer on social media, to someone very much at the heart of our public conversation. He's on Piers Morgan show. He's on Newsnight. He's on pretty much every TV show you'll watch. He's had a best-selling book. His YouTube channel, and this pains me to say it, is even bigger than ours here at Novara Media. It's got about 1.6 million subscribers. He has been unique in selling the argument about asset and wealth inequality and how it's only going to get worse. This issue, more than anything else, is going to critically undermine democracy and liberal society if we don't do something about it. But here's what's really interesting. The bigger Gary Stevenson has become, the more widespread his arguments have proven, the stronger the counterpoints, the more vitriolic the arguments against him, often personal. So the more we hear about a wealth tax, the more we hear about Mr. Stevenson and his diagnosis of the economy, the more we hear the other side as well. So we thought it's high time we got Gary Stevenson back in at Novara Towers to have a conversation about the problems, but also the solution he wants to talk about, that important wealth tax, and the changing character of the people he's up against. Gary Stevenson, welcome back to Downstream.
Thanks for having me back.
It's the fourth time.
Yeah, fourth time. Fourth time in 4 years, yeah. Once a year, annual, me and you.
The message always stays the same.
Well, I think I like to think it evolves a little bit, but, repetition is part of the game.
You're very good at that.
Yeah.
The hook for our conversation today isn't a new book, isn't a paperback. It's an event on TV. You just dropped a documentary with Channel 4.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about it. How did you find making a documentary as well compared to a book?
Painful. It's painful. Documentary. It was interesting to me to do something more collaborative, because my YouTube and my book, it's just me. You know what I mean? It's all me. So it was nice to do something a bit more collaborative. Yeah, I didn't enjoy spending time with the energies of some of the people I had to spend, Samuel Leeds, one of the guys, I was with him for 5 hours, 6 hours. Dear. It was you end the day thoroughly depleted and depressed. But I'm proud of the documentary. I think it's good. It's coming out at an interesting time, obviously, because Prime Minister's changing. We're in the middle of a national conversation about where do we go from here, what do we change? Whether it gets me the ability to influence the new Prime Minister or not, I don't know. But look, it was hard work. I'm proud of it. It's a new creative product. I hope people watch it. And I hope it can influence the conversation and reach new people who might not know about my work up till now.
Did you learn anything making the documentary? I don't want to dwell on it too long in terms of the process, but
yeah,
it's obviously different to YouTube, right? You don't have people answering back.
Yeah, so the production company is called Mindhouse. It's Louis Theroux's company. So obviously he's the most famous documentary maker, I guess, other than David Attenborough. And they taught me the Louis Theroux style of interviewing, which is basically don't be a dick really early on. Let them try and give them rope to hang themselves with, try and get them talking. I think it taught me to be a better interviewer. it's a skill in it. Trying to get people to show themselves, get people to open up, show some of their personality. I've avoided spending time with people that I really don't like. I don't do a lot of interviews on the channel. And it was interesting to see, obviously, well, in the last couple of years, my stuff has blown up. And like, I'm in the game now. You know, I'm getting shot at by all of the biggest dickheads in the world. And I don't like this sort of salacious, like, gossip stuff. But yeah, it was interesting to sit down with them, try and understand, like, what's in it for them? Why do they fight so hard against this thing? Yeah, but yeah, it could be a little bit spiritually depleting on some days.
We're going to talk obviously about the content of the documentary. Also, you were on Piers Morgan last night. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about that. You might be doing Newsnight tonight. I mean, we can't talk about that because it's in the future.
Yeah.
But the Piers Morgan one was funny because it was 45 minutes of, you know, you being very articulate in your argument. Now, people don't have to agree or disagree with it, but it's very clear. And Piers Morgan not really engaging with the substance of what you were saying, which again, I found quite interesting. But let's talk about the actually important stuff.
Yeah.
Not the salacious gossip, as you say.
Yeah.
Elon Musk is now a trillionaire.
Yeah.
And that's very recent.
Yep.
He's been worth hundreds of billions of dollars for a few years, but a trillionaire is that threshold. It's a big one. I don't think there was a single company worth $1 trillion until Apple in 2018. Should trillionaires exist?
No. Very simply, if you have trillionaires, you cannot have wealth-owning middle class. It's the scale of it it's just ridiculous. It's just so the size is so enormous. You know, we spoke to one guy in the documentary, one billionaire, and he says he doesn't take less than 12%. So, you know, if Elon Musk is making 12% on a trillion, he's making 120 billion a year, you know. So he's making, you know, more than 2 billion a week. These guys are not really paying taxes. Of course, he's only one of a number of this growing centibillionaire class. If you allow them to exist untaxed, when I did my first YouTube video in June 2020, it was about the enormous amount of government COVID deficit. And at the beginning of COVID, we knew the UK government was going to give away £350 billion. And that number was so big, I didn't know how to describe it. And I settled on £350 billion is more than 3 times the wealth of Jeff Bezos, the world's richest man. So just 6 years ago, £350 billion was 6 times the wealth of the world's richest man. Now, 6 years later, we've got a man worth $1 trillion. This speed of growth, they'll own everything very soon. It's not complicated. You know, you can't have billionaires, centibillionaires, trillionaires growing their wealth at 30, 40, 50% a year in economies that are growing at 1%, 2% a year and not have very, very quickly them owning everything. And, you know, take a little bit of historical context. That is both the historical norm in this country and the current norm in the world, which is tiny group of people own everything, everyone else lives like shit. And that's where we're going to go, you know. So take morality out of it. It's a simple question. You can have trillionaires, you can have untaxed trillionaires, but only if you accept desperate poverty for 90%. It's a choice. It's a choice.
You had this line yesterday with Piers Morgan. It was like a real moment of clarity, which I wouldn't really associate with his interview shows, where you say, look, Piers, in between all of his barbs aimed at you, look, Piers, you can either have untaxed trillionaires, untaxed trillionaire class, untaxed billionaires, or you can have an asset-owning middle class. You can't have the two things. And, you know, rather than make a counter-argument, he just started talking about envy and...
Yeah.
Which is really strange, because you just said there a really important thing. Look, if somebody's getting 12% returns on $1 trillion a year, that's 120 billion pounds or $120 billion a year. Between 0 and 2% is being taxed according to, you know, the best available information, because, of course, these people aren't earning that via incomes where they pay income tax. And that's clearly a problem. And I think even somebody on the centre right, if you explain all of this to them, would say, okay, well, we need to address some of it. But he was talking to you like you were saying just nonsense, moronic claims. Yeah. Why is that? It's like he wasn't listening to your data points.
You know what? I think this interesting thing has happened in the last couple of years where we've kind of won, like me and the rest of the people who are fighting against like rapidly growing inequality. We've kind of won the argument with the public. And I think, if I'm totally honest, like I think we've kind of got them like running scared a little bit. I did a video a few weeks ago about The Economist magazine. And The Economist ran like an anti-wealth tax article saying, wealth tax don't work, wealth tax is rubbish. What you need is a modified inheritance tax. Which is the same argument Dan Neidle made to me. It wasn't in the document. Dan Neidle was one of the people interviewed in the documentary. And another very influential figure made the same argument to me while I've been doing a lot of lobbying in the last sort of 6-9 months. And I find this argument so interesting because from the perspective of an ordinary person, a wealth tax and an inheritance tax are very different because most people don't leave much for inheritance. So you have wealth when you are alive, but you don't leave much for inheritance. But because rich people get richer every single year, every single penny they have now will be inherited. So there is no functional difference between a wealth tax and an inheritance tax for a very rich person because all of their wealth will be inherited. The only difference is the frequency. One is 2% every year and one is 50% every 30 years. So to see like The Economist magazine come out and simultaneously argue for and against the same tax, like I think, for me, to be honest, there's a bit of a beauty to it. I think they're just spinning. They're just absolutely spinning. And what they've resorted to is trying to make people scared. You know what a gish gallop is?
No.
Gish gallop is a debating technique. I think it's like mastered by Ben Shapiro. And you saw a lot of this when I went on Piers Morgan last night. Say lots of things very quickly, 7, 8 arguments, 10 arguments, 12 arguments, don't let you speak, argument. And I say so many arguments in such a short amount of time, you become disoriented, the viewer becomes disoriented, and there's no way for you to counter every claim because I've just like absolutely and you know who obviously does this all the time? Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump's whole thing is flood the zone, which is just like shock. I'm going to get my fucking red cards cancelled. Just any kind of nonsense. Just like, I think the art now is to create a scared public. And I think we've moved beyond economic arguments now. And I think probably the best little bit in the documentary is when I talk to, Francis Fulford, who's this like 29th generation heir. And we talk about what would you do if I actually get the tax in? And he'd say, well, me and my people would get together and we'd get you kicked out. And we would do what we've always done, which is we would fight and we would win. And I think what you see in the documentary and also in like the increasing like desperate attacks is this sort of flimsy smokescreen of intellectual defense is kind of going. And what you are seeing is we're powerful. What you are starting to see is like the unabashed, unashamed exclamation of we're powerful. We're powerful. You are weak. And we are strong. We own the assets. We own the newspapers. We own the politicians. We've got the money. We've got the lawyers. Fuck off. I think that's what you're starting to see come through. And it's scary for me, but a little part of me does fucking love it. I've got to be honest.
Do you think as well these people, I mean, you say that we won't have an asset-owning middle class if this carries on, but it also feels like, obviously, these people claim to speak on behalf of the prosperous middle class.
Yeah.
Do you think they know they're being hypocrites? So, for instance, Piers Morgan is saying, well, you hate wealth, you hate success. Meanwhile, in this country, we have a situation, maybe people watching and listening, if you're not in the UK, aren't familiar with this. Between £100,000 and I think £125,000, we have a marginal tax rate of 60%.
Yeah, more if you have student loans, 70%. Yeah,
it's crazy. And that is because the threshold goes up over 100k, but also you lose something called the
personal allowance.
Yeah. So every £2 you earn over 100,000, you lose £1 of the personal allowance, which is a tax-free allowance up to 12,500 circa. Yeah. So basically, if you're on 100 to 125,000, you're taxed at 60%, or like you say, more. Piers Morgan isn't talking about those people. He doesn't seem interested in helping those people. Yeah. Instead, he wants literal trillionaires to not pay tax. Yeah. And he's saying, but I am helping you. Meanwhile, some of those people are actually more screwed than they've been in a really long time. Yeah. I mean, you might think, well, look, if somebody's earning 110 grand or whatever, who cares? Well, actually, if you've got 2 kids and one of the parents isn't working, they've lost a job, and the other one's on that much money, and they live in London, you also lose child benefit, you lose free child care, you lose tax credits on childcare. Actually, it's quite a big deal. And those are the sorts of people that the centre-right media, the Times, the Telegraph, used to care about. That was their base. Yeah. And now they're basically saying, fuck you, we're on the same side as multi-billionaires and trillionaires, generally speaking the other side of the Atlantic, but also here as well. Do you think they know they're being hypocritical, or are they so deep in the kind of false consciousness they think one is the other?
I'm really interested in this question of like what is going on in the minds of the people who defend the billionaires and who oppose wealth taxes. What is actually going on with them psychologically? And I don't think it's one size fits all. I find Piers Morgan fascinating. We got offered to go on again, and my agent was like, "Fuck it, you killed it first time. Don't go on again." And I was just like, To be honest, I went on more out of curiosity than anything. I knew it was going to be like an attack, and I was just like, I think, this is me being unnecessarily wanky, I think like Piers Morgan is like the modern like rebirth of like the Shakespearean fool. Like he is like the court jester. And I think, it's a comedy show, isn't it? It's a comedy show. And Donald Trump is also a comedian. And I think there's my brother, he won't like me saying this. He's convinced that fascism is primarily like an aesthetic philosophy, which is about a certain kind of like dance. I think Piers Morgan is a dancer. He dances, and like he enjoys these like rolling around in the dirt and getting covered in shit. And
he's not trying to learn anything, right? That was quite obvious to me. You're saying quite coherent arguments. Again, you can agree or disagree with them.
Yeah.
But he was just, like you say, it was like judo. He was trying to do moves.
You can't take your eyes off him. Like, what is he doing? Why is he like that? Like, what is going on? And, so there are so many elements of our society at the moment who are, in one way or another, defending the very, very rich. And I do wonder what motivates these people and what drives them. I wonder if it's fear. Because the truth is, I don't want to like be like unnecessarily like fear-mongering. This is going to get so much worse so quickly now. And we are...
Why so quickly? Because of the mathematical kind of...
Yeah, but it's just because like inequality grows in a compounding way. Like wealth grows in a compounding way. Yeah. So, just like anyone who understands like exponential growth is, it starts slow and then like COVID, it's like, like 10 cases a day, 20 cases a day, 50 cases a day. And then 2 months later, it's like fucking 100,000 cases a day, like that's exponential growth. And especially since COVID, the rich really increased their wealth very, very quickly. And it has a momentum of its own now. It's like a black hole. It has a gravity of its own. And have you read The Plague by Camus?
Probably about 25 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, I love this book because, so anyone who doesn't know, Camus is this French-Algerian author, and he lived in Paris during the Nazi occupation of France, and he was like underground, quite influential guy in like the Resistance, a wonderful author. He's written The Outsider, The Plague, or his most famous, but he's written lots of other good books. And this book is like, it's about an epidemic, but it's a metaphor really for what is it like to live in a society that is collapsing and it's falling apart and it's being overwhelmed by evil, basically. And like how do people react and what do people do? And the truth is, like, it's fucking overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Like what is happening now and what is going to happen now is scary. And it's really, really scary. And that's, it's me saying that as somebody who is pretty rich, pretty financially secure. I'm scared. I'll be honest, I'm scared. I'm scared about where this is going to go. I'm scared about where this is going to end up. I'm scared about what it means as somebody who has a public profile, opposing the rich, opposing the billionaires. Look back at what happened last time we had this kind of rapid increase in inequality, in the early 20th century. And what Camus writes about in that book is most people in that situation, very understandably, in one way or another, kind of lose their fucking minds. They become incredibly hedonistic, or they become incredibly angry, or they become incredibly religious, and obviously I'm not Camus, but I like to think the message he tries to send, he has this one central character who is a doctor who is not a very glamorous or sexy individual, and he just gets his head down and tries to stop the plague, and he tries to build a group of people to try and stop the plague. And I think what he's saying is, at times of crisis, the world is not going to be saved by superheroes, but by ordinary men and women who manage to keep their heads on, stay calm, stay sensible, get their head down and work and get out of it. But you have to recognise it's scary. We live in times that are scary. And I think this kind of like instinctive bootlicking, if I can say what it is, which is like, really, to be honest, what it is daddy save me. That's what it is. It's daddy save me. Like I'm scared. I see society changing incredibly quickly. I see poverty growing. I see anger growing. I see racism growing. I see fascism on the edge. You know what I mean? And let's be serious about what this thing has led to in the past. People have a right to be scared. People are scared. And what do they want? They want fucking daddy to come and save them. And that is why, at times like this, a lot of the public, totally understandably, want to vote for strongmen who say they're on your side. It's people, when you're scared, you're a kid again. And if some guy, whether it's like Elon Musk or Donald Trump or Nigel Farage, comes out with a hand outstretched, I will save you. And you're scared, and this guy, what you sense is power. And what fascism is worship of power, right? And I think, people like you and me who don't want Farage, and if I'm totally honest, I'm not scared of Farage and Trump. What I'm scared of is what comes after Farage and what comes after Trump. Because they will fail on the economy, and maybe we'll get another boring centrist in, and they will be replaced by somebody further to the right. And that will keep happening, and this will be serious. And I think people like you and I need to ask ourselves, why is it that so many of the working poor of this country, or whatever country, because it's happening everywhere, when they look for who's going to save us, why is it that they are appealed to by Trump and Farage and not by us?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, Farage and Trump don't care about the fucking poor. Farage just wants to make money. And so does Trump. Trump made £1 billion ripping off his own supporters in a crypto scam. But we need to ask ourselves, if we are the people who really care about the poor, and if we are the people who really want to save the poor from poverty, why is it that the poor instinctively think, in many cases, obviously not all cases, that they're better off with Farage or Trump? And I ask this myself every day. And when I see these people, like the guys on the documentary or whatever, Piers Morgan or anything, protecting the rich, they're scared. And they should be fucking scared. Do you know who Chris Morris is? Mm-hmm. Chris Morris, those who don't know, is one of my favourite comedians. He did The Day Today, Brass Eye, Four Lions, excellent. I met him at a fucking random left Illuminati party, because that's what I do nowadays. And he gave me this book, Bury the Chains, which is about the British fight against slavery. And he tells this story of what it was like in Jamaica during the era of slavery. And what you have in Jamaica is you have these incredibly wealthy white people, British people, whatever, living on these amazingly luxurious estates and with these massive plantations being worked by black slaves. 5% of the island is incredibly wealthy white people, and 95% of the island is black brutalized slaves. And these people live in terror, all of them. And they should, because, and the thing is, the rich are also scared, and they should be scared, because what we are moving into now is a period of intense chaos. And nobody is safe. And the rich like to tell themselves they're safe, but they're not safe. Nobody is safe in war. Nobody is safe in chaos. So, of course, Piers Morgan is going to cozy up to the rich and the powerful because he thinks they're going to protect him. And that's probably his best bet.
But there are certain people, there are writers at the Financial Times, various columnists, somebody like Ruchir Sharma, I think, who have, enough foresight and intelligence and historical knowledge to say, we've kind of been here before. We know how volatile and chaotic societies can be with massive income and wealth inequality. Yeah. It's absolutely not in our rational self-interest to go much further. Maybe this is fine even, but clearly the path is a bad one. The trajectory is taking us to a bad place. Yeah. And I do kind of find it interesting that, Ruchir Sharma wrote a great book a couple of years ago, basically saying many of the things you're saying. Mm-hmm. He was focused really more on quantitative easing, loose monetary policy, but he basically said, look, this is probably the worst set of economic policies made in my lifetime. I think you would have said that. You'd probably have to go back to the 1920s, right? With the various monetary policies, both sort of before and after the Great Depression, Wall Street crash and whatnot. He's saying that this is really, really bad economic mismanagement. And, he doesn't go on Piers Morgan. He doesn't get to be a major sort of figurehead. But he's in the Financial Times. And so it's interesting that when you say basically what he's saying in an argot that working people can understand, you get called a populist. And it's populist claptrap, like Dan Neidle would say. Right, his first words to you, basically.
Populist claptrap,
Right? Well, okay, so either you're saying it in an obscure way, which most people aren't going to understand, or you say it in a clear way that's actually, comprehensible to most working people. So you kind of can't win, can you?
Yeah, I find The Guardian so interesting. I I wrote an article for The Guardian this weekend.
They reviewed the doc as well. Have you read that? The review of the
Yeah,
documentary?
they said, Gary's a dickhead or something, which is what they always say.
It was very
Yeah.
critical. I don't quite understand why.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, but listen, I know that they won't run the article that I wrote for them. I wrote a piece for them, we agreed to me to write an article and I wrote a piece and it was like critical. Because I am fascinated by the British upper middle class. I've never seen such a suicidal group of people. Like, I've never seen anyone, like, I don't know, I don't know if they're like drunk on comfort, but like, what are they doing? You've got it so good and you're not even trying to defend it.
Yeah.
You're going to give it away. Like, and that was the article that I wrote for them. I just like, because the poor are poor, and they're going to fight, you know what I mean? And they're going to struggle and they'll do what they can and they'll bounce around and they'll be confused because they're getting lots of mixed messages. But, the middle class, especially the upper middle class who read The Guardian, it's like they've got a bit of space, they've got a bit of time, they've got a bit of money. Surely they can see where things are going. But maybe they can't. And perhaps I antagonise them unnecessarily in my communication style, and it's probably true, to be fair. But they've got so much to lose. When I was working in Japan, so for those who don't know, I used to be an investment banker, and I had a bit of a depression. I was working as a trader in Japan, and my boss was a dick. And I took my Japanese junior out, and I was just complaining about my boss, what a dick he was. And my junior was a Japanese kid, and he said to me in English, he said, the problem with, I've got to remember what is his name in the book, because I can't use his real name. The problem with Watanabe-san is he has a very small heart. And now, like, having learned Japanese, like, I understand now he translated that directly from the Japanese. But I remember when he said that, I remember thinking, you fucking nailed these guys. Like, what I want to say to the British middle class is like, fight with us. Do you know, they think I'm not on their side. And they don't understand, like, I'm trying, listen, they are going to be decimated here. And people like me who've grown up in poverty will survive the poverty. But there'll be no more kitchen renovations.
That's a call to arms, isn't it?
Yeah, you know what
For
I mean?
that lot.
But to be honest, sometimes, this is the thing. Have you read Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse?
No.
He talks about samsara, which is you get lost in just the daily comings and goings of life. And I don't want, this is going to sound unnecessarily flippant, and it's a bit of a joke, but it's also serious. I think the problem is the kitchen renovations. Because, you've got to deal with the builders and it's a faff and, what kind of doors am I going to get, and this and that. And there's always another one. I've done that, so I've got to do the bathroom now. And I honestly think the middle class are giving up their birthright for a series of housing renovations. They're so busy. They're so caught up in this.
So what's the birthright?
The birthright is the fact that your kids can go to university,
right,
and you can have comfortable housing, and you don't have to worry about putting food on the table, and there's heating in the winter. I want people to recognise that this way that we have lived in this country for 70 years, where you have like a decent, sizable middle class, and ordinary working people can not necessarily be rich, but have those basic dignities and securities, are not normal, either historically in this country or currently in the world. And these things can easily be lost. And I think, do you remember when Donald Trump used that term, shithole countries? This really captured something for me. Because when Donald Trump said shithole countries, what he was saying was, this kind of desperate poverty is a thing that happens to black and brown people. That's what he was saying. And he's saying that in the context of a world which has for 70 years provided most, obviously not all, white people with a kind of decent quality of life and financial dignity as a birthright. And what he's saying is, don't worry, because we're white people. Going to be fine. We're always fine. That happens to shithole countries. And I want people to take a step back and realise, read your fucking Charles Dickens. My grandmother was born in London 100 years ago at the back end of the Industrial Revolution, right? So at the end of the biggest and fastest ever increase in economic productivity and growth in the history of humankind ever. And 3 of her siblings died of tuberculosis, a preventable disease of poverty, in the heart of the richest city, in the richest country, in the richest empire ever, at the back end of the biggest ever increase in productivity. That has happened here in a white country, in the UK, just 100 years ago. And we can go there again. It's not a thing that just happens to shithole countries. When you see the speed of increase in poverty that has happened here in the last 5 years. And look at the story of the last 25 years. It's speeding up, isn't it? The increase in poverty is speeding up because that is what exponential growth is. That is what exponential growth does. So the British middle class need to step up and stand with us. And they need to recognise if the British middle class cannot ally with the British working class, then the elites, the international elites, will destroy them and will take everything. They need to recognise that. And this is going to be the game now. If the rich can divide the middle class and the working class, then they will take everything.
But I suppose a counter-argument is lots of those people do kind of agree with you. You know, many of them voted for Labour in the last general election, or they like the Green Party, who are saying similar things on these kinds of policies. Or they vote, you know, they might be in a Tory Lib Dem marginal, and they vote Lib Dem because the Lib Dems are closer to some of these positions than the Tories. They would say, Gary, look, the problem isn't us. The problem is actually you're talking about the working class. And this is the target vote really for reform. It's what reform really needs to get over the line. Is people without university educations. Yeah. Right? This is just an observation. It's a sociological observation. It's just true. You know, those are the people actually that would have been historically the bulwark of the kind of political movements you're talking about. And they've gone. So we are seeing a gradual, and you're saying you won the argument, which I think is kind of true actually. Yeah. You have won the argument amongst broadly graduate educated people under 65. And also some people over 65 as well. Yeah. Right? You can go to somewhere like Chichester, which I think was a conservative seat continually from the early 19th century with one exception. Yeah. Then they go Liberal Democrat at the last general election. I was there talking to people in Chichester, beautiful cathedral city. Yeah. They were all saying the same thing. There's shit in the harbour, you know, we need to nationalise the water companies, the rich are too rich. Yeah. You know, these are people who were, you know, ex-sergeant majors in the army and 75 years old, and they have their, what's that rose? The famous roses, I forget their company. Okay. There's a famous expensive rose, and they spend 400 quid down the garden centre every Sunday. And even those people are saying, you know what, things are actually getting out of control. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, like, maybe persuading them isn't the task, it's actually the ones below.
I mean, the people who are voting reform are more likely to be working class, although realistically they're more likely to be old. But the vast majority of reform voters want wealth taxes. So the people who are voting for reform may not be the middle class, but the people who are blocking wealth taxes are the middle class. And this is the situation we're in right now, right? Starmer's gone, obviously. It's going to be Burnham. We know it's going to be Burnham. Burnham's going to come in. I think everybody knows, because it happened to Sunak and it happened to Starmer, there is a very real risk that Burnham's popularity plummets very quickly, primarily because of failure to deal with falling living standards. And Burnham's major challenge, in my opinion, is going to be trying to establish a narrative, as well as obviously a policy behind it, on what he's going to do on the economy, what he's going to do on living standards, and how he will be meaningfully different from Starmer and Sunak. And I can't really see any way that he does that other than by meaningful change on the one policy which the public is demanding, which is wealth taxes. But realistically, and I hope this doesn't happen, and I'm going to try my best to prevent it from happening, what he is more likely to do is some sort of technocratic economic technobabble thing, which is basically what Starmer did and what Sunak did. And if he does that, he's going to be desperately unpopular. And the people who are pushing him in that direction are the upper middle class, the intelligentsia. So, you know, this is what I mean when I say the upper middle class is suicidal. You know, I'm not even trying to tax them. The taxes which I push for are on wealth above £10 million. And I think, you've got to be honest, it reminds me a little bit of the fucking Smeagol from Lord of the Rings, right? Which these guys are so, like, my fucking precious about their wealth, that even the remote question of, like, taxing wealth. And this is the ultimate victory of Margaret Thatcher. And to be honest, you know, it's from the fucking Bible, right? Love of money is the root of all evil. You know, and this is what you'll see. It will be the middle class's love of money and of wealth, which will lead to the destruction of their wealth, because they need the poor to protect them from the very rich. But they are trying to ally with the very rich, because when they hear people like me say tax wealth, they're like, oh my God, I've just renovated my kitchen. You know what I mean? Let go of your fucking kitchen, mate. Forget about it. Help us protect ourselves from the real threat, which is the Mongol horde on the fucking horizon, which is the fucking centibillionaires and the trillionaires. They will take everything. That's basic maths. And if you allow them to take everything, that means you have nothing. But it is love of money. It is love of money. You know, these people are drunk on comfort. They are. You see it. And they don't like people like me because, I'm telling them they're the fucking bad guys. You know what I mean? But, it's not about good guys and bad guys. It's about, are you fucking smart enough to protect your fucking wealth? Look at how wealth is being transferred. And I think what's happened in the last 20 years is the holes have been patched by increasing government debt. So the big transfer of wealth recently has been from the government to the rich. And now the governments are massively, massively in debt. And that has enabled this basically insatiable appetite, which happens when you have this enormous untaxed passive income. Government can't borrow anymore, but the rich are still buying. It's got to come from somewhere. So now you're left with three choices, which is either significant increased taxation of the very rich, significant increased taxation of working people, including the upper middle class, or further dismantling of the welfare state. And the middle class need to realise that if they are saying don't tax the very rich, then we are left with taxing themselves. They're left with taxing themselves or dismantling the welfare state. And maybe they hope we dismantle the welfare state. But once the welfare state is gone, the rich are even richer and they're still buying. If we're playing chess and every day you're taking a piece and I'm not taking any, eventually I lose that game of chess. I lose all my pieces. It's just maths, isn't it? You can't keep squeezing a sponge and expecting something to come out.
Well, this is it. You were talking, when you were on Piers Morgan last night, there was an economist next to you, Kristian Niemietz, who we've had on before, actually.
Yeah.
And I have to say, he's just very evasive. When you try and pin him down on this or that, because he's a neoliberal.
Yeah.
And he said, well, what is a neoliberal? And then we talk about the history of neoliberalism, and, the place where you work has overtly spoken favourably about these people, Hayek and Friedman and whatnot. He was saying things, kind of trying to sort of diminish your credentials and whatnot. But like you say, if you have an economy, even running at 2%, which is pretty good, right? Mm-hmm. In the post-war period, even if an economy is running at 2%, and you have people whose wealth is growing at 12 to 15% per annum,
sometimes more, yeah.
Something strange is going to happen in terms of resource allocation within that society. And they just don't have an answer, and they sort of poo-poo and say, you don't know what you're talking about. I also wanted to say one more thing, which is, and it's really relevant to what you said a moment ago about what's changed in recent decades is a big state, but not helping working people. So people say, we have a big state, we need to shrink the state. We do have a big state, but it's often at odds with interests of working and middle class people. 1970s, rising productivity, rising wages, rising home ownership. We know all this stuff. But also you had a state with huge net assets, right? Had a great, tons of assets, no debt.
Yeah.
Today we're in 2026.
Yeah.
Not just people in high levels of personal debt, but also obviously the state, 100% of debt to GDP ratio. We don't have any assets. We don't have any social housing. We don't have British Airways. We don't have all these other companies that we had before I was even born. Again, why can't somebody like Piers Morgan understand that? I mean, that is quite a visceral shift in his lifetime, surely. The state used to be really rich, now on 100% debt to GDP. Why is that? You can't think it all went to poor people because poverty is higher than it used to be.
You know what? Oxford University Debating Society. So you go, I wasn't in the debating society. I wasn't not my interest, but I knew people who were there, right? You turn up and they give you an argument, argue that case. And I don't know about you, but me personally, and I think most ordinary people, they argue for things they fucking believe in. But Oxford University Debating Society teaches something different. You argue for what's on that piece of paper. And, Dan Neidle, obviously, who I interviewed in the documentary, is a lawyer. What does a lawyer do? He argues for what's on the piece of paper. You argue that case. And so, obviously, I was a trader. I get criticised for talking about it all the time. But I remember the first time I put a big trade on. I remember it very, very clearly. It was something like November 2008. It was a 3-month dollar Swedish krona foreign exchange swap. And I bought and sold. I lent $300 million of US dollars in this product. Everybody was doing it. It was making tons of money. And I remember I went home that day. And I was still living with my parents. And a very small house. And I was eating dinner with my mum and my dad and my sister in this tiny little kitchen. We had a little black and white TV that you had a dial on it. I'm not joking. We really did. And I just thought, I've never even fucking been to Sweden in my life. And this thing happens when suddenly, for the first time in your life, you have something very real riding on the things that you say and the arguments that you make and the things you believe, when suddenly you think about your opinions in a very different way, and you suddenly start thinking, am I actually right on this? Fuck, what if I'm wrong? And you start thinking, suddenly you have all these questions about the fucking Swedish economy and all these. And I went in the next day at like 5 a.m, like researching everything, asking everyone. And if I'm totally honest, I don't think what is actually true is a big part of the rationalization process in the minds of most people when it comes to developing their opinions. I think that people's opinions are chosen based on like social factors, whatever works best for them. I think people have a very strong, like deep-seated sense of what of perceived self-interest and fitting in with the group. But, you know, I don't think people really care about. So, you know, Kristian Niemietz, he's just arguing what he's supposed to argue. It's the piece of paper there in front of him. You know what I mean? And, you know, I think what is interesting about me, you know, I don't come from a political background. My job was to make money and to be right and to make correct predictions. You know what I mean? And that's all I try to do. And I still keep betting on these things. I've been betting on these things constantly throughout. You know what I mean? And in a way, I wish people like Kristian Niemietz were forced to bet on their opinions, right? Because, you know, I went and I debated the IEA. It wasn't Kristian Niemietz. It was Mark Littlewood. This is years ago. You've watched it. I remember because you spoke about it.
Yeah,
and he said, once we raise interest rates, the economy will get better. This is when rates were still zero. And I just laughed at him because I knew rates were going to go up. And I was like, I think you're going to see that that's wrong. You know what I mean? And, you know, obviously the IEA, who Kristian Niemietz works for, also said, let's cut taxes on the rich and that will improve the economy. And we all saw what happened under Liz Truss. I just think there's this thing that happens. And in a sense, as somebody who comes from a working class background, I do feel that it is a little bit of difference in class attitudes between the middle class and the poor, which is, these guys are willing to... I think what's true doesn't come into it. They want to stay in the club, you know, and they don't want to piss off their friends. And it really frustrates me, like, because obviously now we're in this space where, like, every fancy middle class journalist likes to call me an idiot, like, every single day. And, you know, when I worked as a trader, I was called an idiot by middle-class people very often. And I fucking loved it, Aaron. Because that's money. You know, my whole career, my whole book is about being called an idiot by middle-class people. And I love it. Because if everybody thinks you're right, there's no money to make. But if everybody thinks you're wrong, I'm going to make fucking everything. All of these middle-class posh boys are taking their wallets out, they're putting it on the table, and I'm taking it home. And at the end of the year, everybody has to say, Gary got it right. And there was, you know, this point with Kristian Niemietz yesterday when I was on Piers Morgan. But I said, listen, if you think I'm such an idiot, why are my predictions all right? You know, my first thing I did at the beginning of COVID, I wrote an article and I made a video saying there's going to be an inflation crisis and a cost of living crisis and an austerity crisis and house prices will go through the roof and stock prices will go through the roof and gold price will go through the roof and we'll get government austerity. And Kristian Niemietz like, oh, well, it's easy to make correct predictions. It's not easy to make correct predictions that are counter consensus on 7 different economic variables and be right on all of them. It's not. And the reason why I can do that is because I'm fucking right on a simple fucking thing. And the reason why I'm able to be right on this is because it was my fucking job to be right. And these guys who are arguing, Piers Morgan's not paid to be right. Piers Morgan's paid to dance. And Kristian Niemietz is not paid to be right. Kristian Niemietz is paid to dance. The truth is, the economics media is not about economics analysis. It is an entertainment product. That is what it is. Listen, I work for Citibank. I'm getting paid millions of pounds a year. If the media calls up Citibank, what do you think's going to happen to European interest rates? They don't put you on the fucking phone to me, mate. They put you on the phone to somebody who gets paid 5% of what I get paid and never even gets to speak to me. You know, and at the end of the day, you get what you pay for. You know, there's a reason why when rich people want their money to be managed, they pay someone like me £2 million a year. And when rich people want somebody to argue their case, they pay Kristian Niemietz 70 grand to chat shit on TV. You know, it's just... Really, what you're seeing here is the death of intellectualism, if I'm totally honest. Because what you have is all of the real good economists, and not obviously there are great economists, you know, I've got great respect for, in particular, Gabriel Zucman, who's done great work in France, but loads of others, Harjun Chang I've had on my channel, Thomas Piketty. But the truth is, you know, I was the top student at LSE. All of the best students went onto the trading floors because you get paid, it's an incomparably better financial option.
Some of the not so great students as well, right?
Oh yeah, I don't want to give the impression that they're all geniuses.
Because you got a first in maths at LSE, or?
Yeah, I got my first in the first 2 years.
So this is the thing. I mean, I know people with 2-2s from, and by the way, 2-2 in maths from the LSE is bloody hard, who have very successful careers in the city.
They're not all geniuses. The traders are not all geniuses, but I think it's interesting, like, because economics has no physical experiments. So in my opinion, the best chance you have of identifying who is a good macroeconomist versus a bad macroeconomist is who is able to correctly forecast in advance. Because we can't do experiments, so the only thing we have is forecasting in advance. And it's interesting that, like, the financial markets and the city, that's all they care about. They don't care about anything else. So, I was famously Citibank stopped trading in 2011, but the other guy was a guy, in my book I called him Billy, working class scouser, worked his way up from working on the cash desk at Halifax, no formal qualifications. This guy runs all the money because he's always right. They don't care about your qualifications. All they want to see is consistent track record of good predictions. But how do we decide who we listen to in the world of public-facing economics? Well, we don't care about predictions. And once you remove that, what you've done is you have removed your objective connection between the so-called science and the truth. Because if I'm no longer able to compete with the powerful people by saying your predictions are always wrong and my predictions are always right, then how are we choosing who we listen to? And it's bound to end up being a posh boys club, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's going to end up who has social capital.
But it's not just finance and economics. I mean, let's talk about geopolitics, foreign policy. If you look at Iran, right? Iran, Israel, the US, when this all kicked off, I just saw so many people at elite think tanks in Washington and London saying this is going to happen. I'm thinking, hold on. Look, just break it down. I know I'm half Iranian, but just break it down for a second. Iran is a country, I think, 7 times the size of the UK, has a population 2/3 the size of Russia, has tens of millions of people deeply ideologically invested in the maintenance of that country's government, even more in terms of the protection of its borders. They have a really sophisticated internal military-industrial complex. You can't even stop missiles being launched from South Lebanon. How are you going to stop it from a country 7 times bigger than the UK? I just want to know.
Yeah.
And this is, to me, common sense. This is something like my dad would say, who's a taxi driver. And I know it's kind of cliche. He's a taxi driver.
Yeah.
And these are quite common sense things that normal people say. But you get to a point where you're so smart, you're so clever, you're so credentialed, you start just saying the most wacky, crazy shit.
Yeah.
And you're building, you're psyoping yourself.
Yeah.
You're making the most sophisticated arguments, not least to persuade yourself.
Yeah.
And I feel like over time, and this is partly to do with the overproduction of university graduates, right? We've gone from a society of 5% of people with degrees to, 40% plus. I feel like there's just this whole class of people now who tell people what to think and what's going to happen, and analysis, who haven't actually got the practical experience.
Yeah.
These aren't CIA field operatives or, brigadiers in Iraq or whatever. And they're almost always wrong. Because it's like you said, it's a quasi-entertainment product.
But I can't help but ask the question, where are the working class voices? Listen, if the people you had giving you advice were the best people in your country, then 80% of them would be working class. Because 80% of the people in the country are working class. And when I was a trader at Citibank, there were only 4 or 5 working class traders on the whole trading floor. I was never there when the top trader in any year was not working class. Like, I think one thing people don't realise when they think about reduction in social mobility and reduction in working class people going to the top universities, getting the top degrees, getting the top jobs, it doesn't just deprive working class people of opportunity. It means idiots in top jobs. That's what it means. The opposite of social mobility is like essentially like random allocation, but it's worse than that because it's actually like almost uniformly rich kids from the same sort of social backgrounds. And Barry's Economics, one of my favourite new channels, he talks a lot about homophily, which is this idea that people from like backgrounds tend to think in similar ways. And, when I look at economics, even when I look at some of the trading floor, when I look at politics, when I look at the rest is politics, that's what I see. We see people from very similar backgrounds, which means between them they have a pretty like narrow lens of what the world is like. Like I think one thing which I'm very lucky about is I came from a poor background and I made money, so I've got like a bit of a broader view of what society is like than other people. But the fact is, we've killed intelligence. I always thought when I just take the next step, I'll find the room with the smart people. I come from a very immigrant area, very like poor primary school, lots of like newly migrated Pakistani families, and then I got into the grammar school. And I was like, well, when I get into the grammar school, then I'll find the smart kids, you know. And there were smart kids in the grammar school, but they weren't really that much smarter than the kids I grew up with. Then when I went to LSE, they were like way dumber than the kids in the grammar school. You know, they went onto the trading floor, like, but we have lost the systems that we should have had, if we ever did have, of correctly identifying smart people from not even poor backgrounds, even ordinary backgrounds, and getting them into the most important jobs in society. And I think what you are witnessing here is genuine intellectual collapse. That is genuinely what you are seeing here. And, you know, these people are so bad at this point, they cannot see that they are bad. You know, it's like, I feel like my whole life nowadays is being called an idiot by idiots. Like, they're wrong all the time. But they look at me and then they laugh because they're like, who the fuck is this kid? And they cannot see that my predictions are consistently correct and their predictions are consistently wrong. You know, it's very like Emperor's New Clothes kind of situation. Like, and it's distressing, but it's also exciting because we have the opportunity to create a space where we have genuine intellectual discussion, and we can build that now. And we have to. We have to.
There's a decadence right across society, and you did talk about it so beautifully a couple of years ago about economic analysis, right? It's not real. Like, literally the last people you should be listening to when it comes to geopolitics are US-based think tanks or people on Newsnight. Literally the last people, or Labour, right? Starmerism has collapsed after 2 years. You can have a bunch of explanations as to why. Structural, or the fact he sounds like he needs Vicks vapor rubber, whatever, right? It's failed very badly after 2 years in terms of national popularity.
Yeah.
And all you see in lots of the sort of press coverage is, well, now they're briefing that Wes Streeting will be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Well, hold on, that would be more of the same. And also what nobody's mentioning is the fact that basically he went as a result of the Greens winning a by-election in Gorton and Denton. But you can't say that. You can't talk about the reality of the situation. You can't say why he's gone, what needs to change, because their priors are X. We're sort of patrician centrists. And so therefore the future has to look like the past. And that doesn't help people make sensible decisions. I want to get back onto the wealth tax.
Yeah.
Because it's important. What would it change and what would it look like? You know, Zuckman talks about, I think, 2% on all wealth over 100 million
euros. Yeah.
You're talking about something different.
To be honest, I'm pretty agnostic on the number. So what we campaign for in this country, me, Patriotic Millionaires, Tax Justice UK, what we campaign for is 2% wealth, 2% tax on wealth above 10 million. So if you're worth 11 million, you're going to pay 2% on 1 million, which is £20,000 a year, right? It's not a lot of money, right? That's what you're going to pay. If you're worth 20 million, then you're going to be paying 2% on 10 million, £200,000 a year. Zuckman campaigns for 2% on 100 million euros, and it's a top-up tax. It's slightly more complicated. The truth is, I'm relatively agnostic about the specific form this tax takes. If you do not do something about the rapid growth in wealth at the very top end, you will inevitably see collapse in wealth in every other section of society, and you will see the relatively rapid, complete impoverishment of the rest of society. So you have to target top end. That's why wealth tax is like a good, because the wealth tax is obviously incredibly well targeted at wealthy people, because it taxes you based on how wealthy you are. Anything that is not a direct tax on the stock of wealth allows the wealthy to like dodge and get the way out of it and avoid it. The truth is, at the moment, we do not have the capacity to tax the super rich in any way. So priority number one has to be building the infrastructure. So I would be happy to start at something, obviously, because Zuckman is taxing above 100 million and we campaign for above 10, Zuckman's tax is a lot less extreme. But some people make the case that you should have a 0% wealth tax, because what a 0% wealth tax gives you is it forces people who have wealth of above whatever your threshold is to declare their wealth. So at the moment, the truth is, we don't even know how much they're worth, which is just like, it's like staggeringly naive to not even worry. This is like saying, oh, we don't worry about how many soldiers Putin has. You know what I mean? Like these are the guys who are going to eat your assets. You need to know like how rich they are, how fast their wealth is growing. sometimes I feel like this discussion has moved into like a kind of exquisitely stupid space where somebody like me who is really an expert on the macroeconomic effects of growing wealth inequality says, this is going incredibly quickly, it's going to destroy society. And people say, all right, why don't you, the guy who is clearly the world's biggest campaigner on this, go and build the entire tax yourself? And I say, well, I think that's probably something that would be better done like collectively rather than me doing it. But here's the best guy in the world, Gabriel Zucman. And then people say, well, fuck off because that's not going to work. I think probably one of the most frustrating things which got cut out of the documentary, I interviewed this guy, Dan Neidle, who is a tax advisor, who is probably the country's most prominent anti-wealth tax campaigner. And what you see is an argument between an inequality economist and a tax advisor, who, if I'm totally honest, I think just wants to kill the tax. And I'm saying, if we don't deal with top 1% inequality, society is going to collapse. And he says, your specific policy proposal is not practical. And what I said to him then, which was not in the documentary...
But why is it not practical? Because he said it says brand new tax, but they were all once upon a time brand new tax.
Let me finish, because I think this is an important point. He says it's not practical. What I said to him then was, help me. Help me. If you think this tax is not practical, we desperately need to do something to stop society from collapsing. I'm the economics guy. I can tell you what we need. You're the tax guy. You can help me design it. Help me. Help me build the tax. And he fucking laughed in my face. You know, so I think what you see here is he just doesn't want to pay fucking more tax. Okay, so...
Is it that, though? I think it's more a sort of small c conservatism where it's just too radical sounding. A new tax.
Yeah.
Well, we have all these other taxes. We can tweak this and tweak that and tweak that.
Yeah.
But, you know, VAT was a new tax once upon a time. Income tax was a new tax once upon a time.
Dan is an expert in tax minimization, right? That's his historical expertise,
he was paid very well for it, right?
Well, and this is the thing, right? The beauty of the wealth tax is two things. Difficult to avoid if well designed because it is defined on how much wealth you have. So like the one thing which wealthy people cannot do, or which we would want them to do if they did, is give their wealth back to society. The only way you can avoid a wealth tax is by no longer being wealthy, which means your wealth has gone back to society, which is what you want. So it's unavoidable, right? And the other thing, it is the only form of tax which actually has the power in the long run to move wealth away from the very rich towards the poor. Because if you tax the rich on their income from wealth, then that does nothing to stop them from holding their stock of wealth. But there are only two taxes which could, feasibly, in the long run, push wealth back from the very rich to society, which are taxed on the stock of wealth, which are wealth taxes and inheritance taxes. So if you are someone like Dan Neidle, who is incredibly good at avoiding tax, that's literally his professional expertise, and is incredibly wealthy, the last thing you want is an unavoidable tax that makes you less rich in the long run. And this is why they will fight to the death on specifically wealth taxes. This is the one thing which they cannot give, because they do not want that wealth to go back to society. And they will do this, it shouldn't be wealth tax, it should be inheritance tax. I think that's a really interesting distraction, because wealth tax and inheritance tax are the same for the super rich. But what they want, they know that inheritance tax is not politically achievable. So they throw this in there. What Dan Neidle said in the documentary was, we don't need a wealth tax, it needs to be a land tax. But really, what you're seeing here is they'll do anything to just avoid paying tax. And the wealth tax is the one tax which actually has the power to get that wealth back to ordinary people.
It's kind of like climate change, right? So you have people obviously who deny climate change, but actually the more dangerous people in the last 20 years have been, well, we know it's changing, but we don't know how quickly. And actually, maybe methane plays more of a role than CO2. And actually, 2/3 of the planet is oceans.
The muddying of the waters.
Precisely. And actually, they're more dangerous people than the ones who just say climate change isn't real. Because you can look at the data and say, hold on, the planet's 1.5 degrees warmer than 180 years ago. It is. Those are quite dangerous people. But I think Dan Neidle particularly I think there's a conservative mindset going on there. I also just think he has sort of main character syndrome. So the idea that he might be wrong about something, this is a personality type, right? The idea that he might be wrong about something and you could be right, I think hurts him. And I associate this with certain people. Some people, they just want the bad thing to go away and they're happy to be proven wrong if somebody else's explanation or response is a superior one. Yeah. I don't get that sense with him. Anyway, on the ins and outs of a wealth tax, I'm for it, by the way. I wrote the conservative case for a wealth tax.
Nice.
For unheard. And this is something I don't really understand, Gary, because I think the Zucman proposal, which isn't as radical as yours, in this country would raise between 10 and 15 billion pounds a year.
Yeah.
So France has slightly fewer billionaires than us, but of course their billionaires are much, much wealthier.
Yeah.
So I think in France his proposal would
raise
raise more money.
Yeah.
But anyway, 10 to 15 billion, not huge amounts. Let's say 15 billion.
Yeah.
I don't quite understand why the centre-right don't say, okay, 15 billion.
Yeah.
Let's get the billionaires to pay for, we can get rid of inheritance tax, right? If you want to, that's raising about 6-7 billion at the moment. It'll be more in a few years' time, but right now it's 6-7 billion. You could get rid of inheritance tax. You could give some other tax cut. You could get rid of various taxes to middle-class people. You could get rid of that tax threshold I talked about between 100,000 and 125,000. You could basically give away loads of goodies to the affluent middle class, right?
Yeah.
Don't even need to be socially just or progressive or, feel good.
Yeah.
But they still don't like it. And or policing, right?
Yeah.
Policing budget in England and Wales, I think, is about 16 billion a year. You're saying that we don't have enough law and order, antisocial behaviour. You could double their budget by taxing billionaires.
Yeah.
By the way, all of your voters would love that. Mm-hmm. Reform voters would love that. Okay?
Yeah.
So the fact that literally nobody in that space is saying it, I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I wonder, is that because they believe, there must be some political opportunists on the right who, just, they must exist, but they must have bought the kind of Kool-Aid that this isn't plausible, that actually, if you do have a wealth tax, all the people leave, it's going to damage growth. So I just want to interrogate some of the arguments around that.
Yeah, sure.
Dan Neidle says that wealth tax would harm GDP growth. Mm-hmm. And a drop in GDP would hit poorer people.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
So I guess there's a couple of sort of economic transmission mechanisms that you could go through to say this is going to reduce GDP. I think what Dan Neidle was trying to focus on is he thought it would reduce investment. And I guess there's
why would it reduce investment?
Well, first you have your classic trickle-down economics argument, right? Which is that rich people save more of their money. There's what I think is, to be honest, quite a naive assumption that if you give rich people more money, then they will save more, and that means necessarily more investment. So you want rich people to have loads of money because rich people are the investors, and that grows the economy. It's kind of a classic trickle-down argument. I don't think it holds up very well historically, because if you look at the period of time when we had much lower inequality and much higher tax on the rich, that 50s, 60s, 70s, golden age of capitalism, we actually had much higher investment and much higher growth. And as we've aggressively increased inequality, investment and growth seem to have both fallen. I guess the other potential argument which you could be making, which Dan Neidle did make in the documentary, is that if you also apply this tax to foreign billionaires, you might disincentivize foreign investment. And I think this is, I think there are actually some arguments against wealth tax which merit discussion. If you tax them, they'll leave. I think at 2%, that's probably not super significant, but some people might. And the truth is, if you want to fix this in the long run, you maybe need higher rates than that. And that maybe would leave some people to try and leave. And then we can talk about, well, how can we deal with that? China taxes foreign owners, for example. But if you do that, then you have to ask the question of, okay, is that going to affect foreign investment? Maybe it will. Well, China uses domestic investment. Maybe British people can own British assets. Maybe we don't want the country to be owned by foreigners. The problem that I have is, I'm in the middle of a media round here. It's so frustrating for me. And, the interview with Dan Neidle was so interesting because, I've literally written an Oxford thesis on this, right? And I've been working on this for 15 years. And Dan Neidle says to my face, you never even thought about this. And it's mind-blowing. And it's incredibly frustrating to me. I want this tax to be designed well, right? And I know that I am the biggest voice in this country about getting this tax done, all right? And we have people in this country who are working on wealth taxes. There's a group called Centre for Tax with economists like Aaron Advani and Andy Summers, good people who are doing good work on it. And to a degree, with the greatest of respect to them, I went over their heads and went to Paris and found Gabriel Zucman and said, listen, I think we could maybe get this. I think you are the best in the world in this. I want you in London. Come to London and help us design this, right? So I am totally aware that if you do a wealth tax badly, it could have negative economic consequences. But I constantly get in these arguments where we need something. And I say, what about this? And people say it won't work. But they're just using it to fuck the argument off. There's no actual interest in talking about how can we do it in a way that works, that doesn't disincentivize investment. Where is that sensible discussion happening? If what they were really saying is the wealth tax as designed is not working, but you recognise that rapidly growing top 1% inequality is a problem, let's have that actual sensible discussion. There's talk about, okay, the valuation costs are too high. Okay, well, maybe we raise the threshold. Maybe we reduce the frequency and increase the rate. Maybe people will leave. Okay, so maybe we have exit taxes. Maybe we talk about taxing also foreign owners, which is what China does. All of these problems are fixable, but the people who are like highlighting the problems, they're not interested in fixing the problems. All they want to do is shut the argument down. And it's what I talk about, the death of intellectualism. Where is the space? I think sometimes in the way I'm discussed, it's like people forget or don't even know. I started to do this. I left Oxford University. I was doing a 2-year master's. I could have done a PhD. I left because I could see there was no space in those areas to discuss these conversations sensibly. And it's the spaces don't exist. The spaces don't. And when I talk to, I'm trying my best to like lobby Burnham's people, and it's not just me, everybody's doing it. I don't say to them, give me a wealth tax. I say to them, give me a team of 5 shit-hot economists, and we work out how the fuck to do this properly. That's what I say to them. But that space doesn't exist.
I totally think, just to be clear about my views on this, a 2% tax on wealth above 100 million.
Yeah.
I just don't see how that drives people away, personally. There clearly needs to be some kind of compact, right? Because wealthy people who live in London also want public transport on time. They want, if they use it, they want their taxi to be nice and clean when they're staying away from the little people. They want crime to be low. They want decent schools for their kids. Or if their kids go to a private school, they want their kid to be safe. That stuff takes taxes.
Yeah.
And I do feel like actually lots of those kinds of people, even if you just said, look, 2% over 100 million, 15 billion that's going to bring to this country a year, and you're going to see significant changes for the better here, 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 and here. I think many of those people say, okay. I think one of the problems we have on the left is actually many of those people look at the last 30, 40 years of governance and say, well, actually, the government's shit at spending my money. Often true, by the way, right?
Yeah.
That's a problem. But if they thought you could deliver on the things you're saying, they would actually happily hand it over, which, like you say, let's have that conversation. But instead we get the stuff about inheritance tax and CGT. Where's Streeting? You're talking about Burnham. He was talking about this stuff.
He basically said tax will not work, which is obviously my
Did that surprise you? Were you talking to him?
No, it didn't surprise me at all, actually. It didn't surprise me at all because, all right, so basically I'm a fucking part-time political lobbyist at this point, and the last 6-9 months I've spent a lot of energy and time trying to lobby these guys. And I'm not obviously historically a political lobbyist. My strategy has always been, I don't trust these guys. I want to put them in a position where either they give me what they want or they're fucked. That's always my plan. It has been my plan since the start. I want to be in a position where Labour cannot realistically win the election unless they do something on wealth taxes. That's always been my plan. That was my plan with Starmer. If I'm honest, I think it was achieved with Starmer. I think that's one of the reasons Starmer failed. Obviously, there were other reasons as well. I think if Burnham doesn't do something serious on wealth taxes, he will fail. I don't want Burnham to fail, because if Burnham fails, it will be Farage. And for a variety of reasons, which we can get into, I really, really don't want that. My plan is to put Labour in a situation where if they don't take action, meaningful action, not wealth tax now necessarily, but meaningful action towards a wealth tax, then they're going to be totally fucked. And I think Wes Streeting, whatever you say about him, he's a canny political operator. He recognises that this is what the public want. He recognises it works for him as a political actor. And he's smart enough to see what's happened. Before Zack Polanski became leader of the Greens, he reached out to me, and he obviously used a lot of my ideas in his platform, and he was like, look, I can see the public are there. I'm going to go hard on wealth taxes, and I think I'm going to be able to build a lot of public support on that. And I thought he was totally right, because the public were there. But that was true for Starmer. I think if Starmer had come in on wealth taxes early, then there would be no Zack Polanski. And if there was no Zack Polanski, then there would maybe still be a Starmer. So Streeting, and I fucking hope Burnham is smart enough to realise that if Labour don't want to get their fucking arse handed to them, they need to at least pretend to engage with me. And if not me, pretend to engage with Zuckman and wealth taxes. Because otherwise, how do you meaningfully signal to the public that you are not Starmer Part 2?
So let's say Burnham comes into power, which he will, I think, the 20th of this month, right? Yeah. He implements 2% wealth tax within 18 months. What happens next? Is that enough runway to then stop the far right in 2029?
It's not easy. So if he does that, I will fucking work my fucking tits off to get him to win the next election. And I've been trying to build like a team of influencers and trying to build influence in that space. And I'll get everyone I can to try and back him. And what I will try to communicate, and obviously, I know I don't fucking dominate British politics or whatever, but like really, like in the social media space, I'm probably the biggest, and I'll be trying to tell you to fucking do it as well as much as I can. Go out and tell the public, this is the first guy I've ever seen who seems to be seriously, meaningfully engaging with this. And it's not going to fix our problems tomorrow, but it is the first time I've ever seen a politician who is realistically serious about dealing with that long-term inequality problem. And I'll go out and I'll back him. Whether that stops Farage, I don't know. The truth is living standards are going to continue to deteriorate because inequality is continuing to grow quickly. We cannot stop that very quickly because we are not ready to get the wealth tax now. But, you could call me an idiot, but I have faith that the British public, if we communicate to them, listen, finally we have somebody who is serious about fixing the long-term problems, will be willing to have patience, and we'll coalesce behind someone who does it. I think there are a variety of reasons why Farage and Reform are in a strong position, like primarily because living standards will keep falling. I think, honestly, that's their best move. Because what other move is there? Otherwise, you're gonna do a string of what's gonna sound like more technocratic centrism, which is exactly what Starmer sounded like, which is exactly what Sunak sounded like, which is exactly what Biden sounded like, which is exactly what Niemietz sounded like in Germany, which has never worked anywhere. You can't just do technocratic centrism with, like a nice northern accent and pretty eyelashes.
It's good you mentioned the eyelashes.
Yeah.
They are very good, aren't they? And it's interesting as well, isn't it, that people talk about the bond markets all the time. But I remember the first Rachel Reeves budget where there was a ton of new taxes. The markets loved it.
Yeah.
And people don't say this, but actually people are worried, or, people who are buying British debt are worried about your capacity to pay that back. And if you're expanding your tax base in a sustainable way, that's a good signal for them. Yeah,
we'll get straight in on this. I think sometimes people talk about the bond markets like they're like the disembodied spirit of Margaret Thatcher, and they just hate anything that's like vaguely left wing. What the bond markets want is high taxes and low spending. It's not complicated because that makes a government more likely to be able to pay them back. So if you increase taxes on the poor, they like it. And if you increase taxes on the rich, they like it. They didn't like it when Liz Truss cut taxes on the rich. What they want is high taxes and low spending. So this bond market stuff, I think it just shows a paucity of analysis. Don't get me wrong, like I recognise if you implement this tax badly, it could cause you problems. But let's be realistic here. Switzerland has one. Spain has one. Norway has one. These are countries with relatively good standard of living. They all have their own problems. Norway and Switzerland probably have two of the best standards of living in the world, in Europe. It's not going to suddenly devastate the country. But yeah, the bond markets want taxes, obviously.
Norway got rid of inheritance tax to implement a wealth tax, which I think, again, that would be an interesting conversation with the right, but nobody's really willing to have it because, like you said, those spaces aren't there. Yeah.
A wealth tax is better than inheritance tax. So inheritance tax, lower frequency.
You can evade them very easily, right?
Yeah, lower frequency. And lower frequency has some like positive features because you don't have to like value so often. Random. Maybe your dad dies at 100 and my dad dies when he's 50. You know what I mean? Random. Like randomness is not generally a positive feature of a tax. And in particular, randomness that punishes particularly people whose dads died, their parents died when they're young. Not a good feature of a tax. Remove that. Get rid of that. I think for inheritance tax, remove it from the timing of the death completely. Set it at the parents' 110th birthday, and set it at a higher rate. Why connect it to the timing of the death? What's going on there? But these are the sensible conversations about tax, which we are refusing to have. If you want to fix inheritance tax, especially for the very rich, you can. Wealth tax and inheritance tax in the context of the very rich are similar taxes. One can replace another. But, everyone who claims to be sensible on tax is they are not trying to create spaces for discussion. They are trying to shut down spaces for discussion. And it's frustrating.
You told Piers Morgan yesterday, we're back to Piers, although I thought this was quite interesting, actually. You said you were tired of the Gary Stevenson show.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
And you said you were going to quit.
Yeah.
What does quitting look like for Gary Stevenson?
So the last like 2.5 years of my life have been like being in fucking washing machine, basically. It's yeah, so I'm like legitimately like quite fucking famous now, and like, you know, it's like I get recognised like 20 times a day when I'm out, and you know, there's always like random nonsense about me on the internet, you know, just like totally made up bullshit basically. People love to chat shit about me. But also what I meant by that was so I've been doing this YouTube for years, and the YouTube is like 30-40 minute monologue, me to camera. And I'm sick of the sound of my own voice, to be honest. And it's just you know, and, you know, you go on and, you know, Piers Morgan is how rich you, and you know, there's all these, was Gary the best trader in the city? It's just gossip. You know, it's the story that I was trying to tell in my book is the economy's falling apart, and all we are doing is trying to compete about who makes the most money. You know, and then what that starts is a fucking gossip campaign about how much fucking money did Gary make. It's just like it's ironic, but I'm fucking knackered, if I'm honest. Like totally knackered.
Why are you knackered?
I've been working.
People work too hard, or because you're not seeing progress? Because you said a moment ago you are seeing progress. Like you are.
No, we are. It's not a lack of progress. You know, I'm incredibly proud of what I've achieved. And I think it's a plan well executed. Like where we are now, it's unbelievable, and it's not just me. You know, Rebecca Gowland, the Patriotic Millionaires, the guys at Tax Justice UK, Gabriel Zuckman, tons of people push this, but a lot of it's me. And you know, I had this plan a few years ago. You know, I had this plan in 2020. You know, like I'm going to stop writing articles. I'm going to go on YouTube. You know, I'm going to write a book. The book's going to be massive. Nobody's going to be explaining economics in a way that's accessible. I'm going to make myself like the one-stop shop for understandable economics in the country. And we're going to displace traditional media, and we're going to force politicians to move. And like, it's fucking worked. It's crazy. We have fucking West Streeting saying tax wealth not work. Like, it's insane. And I'm like incredibly, it's crazy. But like, so obviously you've read my book, right? And that book is a story of me becoming obsessed with money and trading and having a really bad burnout. And the book's called The Trading Game, obviously. Like, I love games. I fucking love games, computer games. I can't play them because I won't stop. Like, and that's my nature is, like, once I'm in the game, I'm obsessed. And there's this, I don't know, did you Arsenal fan?
About 20 years ago,
He had this album, Boy in the Corner. There was one song where he used to just repeat again and again. Review the situation, take part, take over. Review the situation, take part, take over. I quit my job in 2014, and I've been watching like British politics since 2014. The British political left, the British political mainstream. And I've been trying to figure out, like, how can I just fuck this shit up and take over this space? You know what I mean? And obviously, I'm not fucking Prime Minister, but like, I'm a genuine player in British politics now, and I do that from my fucking kitchen, right? But that has come because since 2014, I've been totally obsessed with this. Well, to be honest, in the 2015, 16, 17, 18, but since 2020, 2021, especially 2022 when I got the book deal. Once I got the book deal offer, which was like massive, I knew like I'm going to get a massive press campaign, and I could see the through line. I could see we can be massive here. And since 2022, I was obsessed about writing the best book. Like, I was obsessed with having massive number one. There was a protest in East London because a Deliveroo driver died. And I went down to the protest, and Dahlia was there. Dahlia Gabriel, obviously, friend of the show. And she was like, how's your book going? And I said to her, it's fucking amazing. It's going to be a massive number one. And that was just after I'd finished it. It hadn't come, it was a year before it came out. And she said to me, like, a couple of years later, nobody says that. But I was obsessed. And the truth is, like, I've been obsessed for years. And I'll go to bed thinking about, how do I do this? I wake up thinking, how do I do this? And I can't do it anymore. I can't. I'll die. I'm 39. I'll be 40 this year. I want to have kids one day. I can't do this anymore. I can't be obsessed like this. I need to.
Does that mean you have to turn off? Are you going to be like Michael Jordan? You have to go from basketball to baseball?
Yeah, I don't know if I could.
Is that a cookery show or something?
I don't. Obviously, I wonder whether I can. Because the way it's been for me in the last like 3-4 years is I'm on and I'm insane for 6 months, and then I disappear for 6 months. You know what I mean? And I'm not fully away because I might be lobbying or like figuring out how to like finance the channel or whatever, this kind of stuff. But I take 3-4 months totally off, and then I'm back and I'm totally on. And I do wonder whether I can sort of find a setup. One of the reasons why I made the documentary is because I'm interested in trying to understand a little bit better more collaborative, creative products. Because the YouTube is entirely me. There's not been a single video. Obviously, there's a few interviews on there. Every video is entirely planned, scripted, written by me, and I can't do it anymore. And I make the videos. You know, I was on Piers Morgan, right? It was fucking horrible. I had to come home and take a shower, and I had to call my mates. So I need to go for a drink. I'm in the pub with Barry's Economics. He's another great YouTuber. Saying I asked fucking Piers. I implied questions about the size of Piers Morgan's manhood, and I'm ashamed of myself. And Barry's just like, have another drink, and he's like, what are we going to do after this? And I had to go home at 11 o'clock and write a YouTube video for the next day, 11 at night. And the video is going to come out this week. It's not as good as the videos I used to make last year. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to make videos that are not as good as my videos last year, not as good as my videos 2 years ago. I need to find something different, something next, something more collaborative. And when I say I'm sick of the Gary Stevenson show, I mean, like, you know, they say you want to go quick, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I can't do it alone anymore.
Has anybody come to you with like proposals from legacy media? Like Channel 4, Gary, be our finance correspondent, or do a 5-part series.
Like but the truth is, like, I get like hundreds of emails a day. I can't read them. You know what I mean? It's just
PA, surely.
I had one, but I'm so obsessive with my work. I couldn't. You know what I mean? I need to figure out a way that this works where it's not like, and it's the way that I am. Like, and I'm a bit of a lone wolf in my work, and I have to figure out if I can find a way to do this job, which is not involve me being obsessed every day. I need to find a way that, because I won't be able to have kids. You know what I mean? I won't be able to have a family. I can't. I give everything to it in a way that's stupid. I need to find a way. And, you know, what I want to say to you and to your viewers is I need help. I can't do this by myself. I can't go out there, get attacked by the dickheads every fucking day. You know, one thing I see when I look at Zack Polanski, and it reminds me of myself. I see the way he's gone there by himself. And I'm sure he has support, but I can tell the way he does his social media that it's him. It's him. And it's him on Twitter. You know, it's not a social media manager, it's him. And I want to say to the left, listen, I know like politics being run by influencers is bullshit. You know, we don't want politics to be the fucking Zack Polanski show or the Gary Stevens show or the Donald Trump show. You know what I mean? We want it to be collaborative. It's the future. I'm sorry. I think the optimal structure of politics in the social media age is influencers. You know, and the left and the centre, to be honest, needs to get serious about creating and supporting and financing and helping its influencers. And I'm really interested to see the Zoran Ramdani thing, because it's the first time I've ever seen what looks like to me a properly supported influencer of the left, like who clearly has a good team around him. And, you know, the alt-right, the far-right, whatever you want to call them, they're killing it on the influencer model. And, you know, these far-right channels, they get given 50 grand anonymous funding at the beginning, you know, from no one. No one even knows where it's from. You know, until and unless the centre and the left find some serious way of backing its most powerful influencers, they'll keep losing. And I think it's relevant for Novara, to be honest, because, you know, you guys have some of the best-known faces on the left, but you play under the Novara model. And to be honest, I think somebody like me, I don't consider us to be competitors, but I think somebody like me has a structural advantage over Novara, because in the social media age, people want to follow a face and a name. And I when I say I'm sick of the Gary Stevenson show and I'm quitting, I'm obviously not going to quit forever, because I see how much power I have and I know how real this game is. But where's the fucking Aaron Bastani show? Where's the Ash Sarkar show? And look, listen, you know, you've got kids, and it's not for me to tell you how to live your life, you know, and it doesn't necessarily need to be you, but it can't just be me. And it can't just be me and Zack. You know, there needs to be 20 of us. There needs to be men and women, black people, white people, old people, young people, people from the north, people from the south, people who went to uni, people who didn't go to uni. And that is what the US alt-right has achieved. You know, and until and unless the left and the centre get serious about supporting its influencers, listen, I'm going to have to stop the YouTube for probably 9 months. And that's a fucking failure of the left, in my opinion. It shouldn't be happening.
But you're a human being. You need, you're not a machine. If you need people, sabbatical is a thing, right? There's lots of industries where people do that.
Yeah.
You probably need a sabbatical.
But look, I did a shout out, I did a video, and I will take a sabbatical. And listen, obviously, I know the left.
You deserve it.
It's not, the left is not on my shoulders, obviously. Like, there's lots of great people. You do great, like hundreds of thousands of people do great work on the left. But I did a video in May last year saying I want to see more influencers. And we saw Louisa Munch on Instagram.
She's great.
She's fantastic. Barry's Economics, he's like, it sounds like a joke channel. It's not. He makes really good videos. These guys are coming up on the back of that shout out. You know what I mean? And one thing I'll say when I come on here is, it's incredibly important, not just that we have good influencers, but all kinds of creative storytellers. You know what I mean? Novelists, filmmakers, artists, graffiti, all these musicians, you know what I mean? Like, and we find ways to back them. For every one person like me, there's like 100 people writing 73-page PDFs and sending them to Rachel Reeves. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying there's no space for those people, but it's obvious that we need, like, look at what Zoran has done, Zoran Mamdani. When is the left going to recognise the need to seriously support its influencers and its storytellers? If you don't do that, you're in a really bad way.
But there's also something cultural going on, right? Which is taking a long time. I remember, of all people to mention, Paul Mason, who I think, I don't agree with him very much nowadays. Yeah. But when he was at Newsnight, I was in touch with him a little bit when he was covering the Greek Eurozone crisis. And he had a lovely metaphor about social media and new media. He said back in the day, if you wanted to move a boulder, political change was this big rock.
Yeah.
And dozens of you had to get behind it and you had to move it together, whether that was starting a business, starting a newspaper, a political party, a faction within a party, whatever. He said, now you can just, you've got a stick, you've got a lot more leverage, which is not you, it's the platforms, and you can just start to move it by yourself. And it's very gentle, it's very gradual, but you get momentum and eventually it falls downhill just as quickly. And I thought that's a great metaphor. But even today, lots of young people don't seem to have got the memo. And this has been going on now for like 15 years. I have young people come up to me quite frequently saying, I want to get into journalism. What should I do?
Yeah.
And I literally have the same advice I had 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Establish a beat. You can become world class on one particular topic within a year.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is. French football, Southern Italian cuisine, public policy outcomes in Okinawa, anything, right? I mean, Okinawa's a foreign language, but you know what I mean? Establish a beat. And number two, as an extension of that, build a public profile on it.
Yeah.
So make the content, YouTube, Instagram, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I think there are people that say, well, I'm going to go work for Novara Media. No, stand as a counsellor where you live. Build an Instagram profile, 40,000 followers, talk about the policies, become a source of information locally. And then if you want a job here, we take that so much more seriously than a 2-1 from UCL. Right?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, means fuck all.
Yeah.
Actually, established kind of work that you've done in the public realm, which has influenced people. I can tell you right now, you watching or listening, if you want to work in the media, that counts for 10 times more than any piece of paper you're going to get from university, including Oxford or Cambridge.
Yeah. But one thing I will say is, if you're making good stuff on social media, I'm going to back you. Like, so Louisa Munch and Barry's Economics, they both started on the back of that video last May. Louisa Munch has got more than 300,000 on Insta. Barry's got nearly 200,000 on YouTube. It took me 4 years to hit 100,000. But like now I'm here and I'm saying, go watch Louisa, go watch Barry. You know what I mean?
1.5 million, 1.6?
1.6, yeah, I know. 1.2 on Insta, yeah.
I remember at one point you were adding I remember we were looking at your YouTube graph.
Just flying, yeah.
Because we're 1.3, you overtook us, and I'm thinking, he's getting like 20,000 subscribers a day, 30,000 subscribers a day.
Yeah, it was crazy. But I'll back it. Well, I can't promise to back everyone, but if I see it and I like it, I'm going to back it. And and you guys should too. Well, the truth is that one of the big things that started my growth was our first Downstream. You know what I mean? And I think you and I, and obviously everyone else at Novara, everyone else with a voice, needs to take seriously that responsibility we have, which is we can help bring other influencers up. We have a space. And one thing that I've been doing a lot in the last year is working really hard to try to support other influencers to help them grow, because I just think there's so much potential political power in that.
We're coming to the end, Gary.
Yeah.
But I did have one question again about Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
You asked him, he asked you how much you worth.
Yeah.
Right? He kept on
again and again
right from the start all the way through to the end, really. And eventually he says, I'll tell you how much I'm worth if you tell me how much you're worth. And I can see something, a light goes off in your mind.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
And you say it's the nearest 5 and you say 5.
Yeah.
but he wouldn't tell you how much he's worth.
Yeah.
Why? Why did he lie? Why did Piers Morgan lie to you?
Why did he lie? I wonder whether Piers has no fear of humiliation or embarrassment, and whether he just has an instinct for clicks. He just knows we're going to get clicks. If I get Gary to say, and then even if I like really obvious, I got him to promise you'll say, and then he doesn't say, and it's embarrassing. He's lied in front of his own audience, but he'll get views on it, won't he? He's no shame. I don't think he's got any shame. This guy.
How much do you think he's worth?
I've got no fucking idea. A lot. I don't know, 30, 40, 50 million. He's obviously
tens of millions.
Yeah,
right?
but I don't give a fuck how much money Piers Morgan is worth. He was. Oh my God, I need to take a shower after I come off of that.
No, because he's saying, you're saying these things, therefore it should be in the public realm how much you're worth, which I agree.
Okay,
No, but to an extent, right?
Yeah.
You want maximal transparency, but then the same applies to him and he's poo-pooing you. I think people would view the conversation differently. If Piers Morgan said, I'm against a wealth tax on wealth above £50 million, and it turns out he's worth £75 million.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's kind of the ballpark he's worth. That is not normal people. He can't speak for normal people when you can't. I would say the same if it was me. You can't. Conditions determine consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I made a lot of money very suddenly in my 20s, and it really dramatically affected my life, my relationships with like the people around me. So I there's this concept, the evil eye. You know this. I used to date this Egyptian girl, and she always used to talk about ayn, which means like the eye. She was like, don't ever tell people because it's going to attract bad energies. You know what I mean? So, I don't like having all this information. I don't like, people. You Google me, if you ask fucking ChatGPT, tell my fucking billionaire. You know what I mean? Imagine how that affects my game on Tinder. You know what I mean? I don't enjoy it. And I don't want these information about me in the public realm.
Why not?
Because I'm...
you remember Patriotic Millionaires, so people know you're a millionaire. And you say it's Patriotic Millionaires precisely to sort of cast away the criticism that's going to come to you while you're jealous. Well, we're not jealous, actually, because we're wealthy as well.
People can disbelieve this. I'm actually quite a private... But I know I've got a fucking YouTube with my fucking face and my name on it, but that was a political strategy. And I'm quite a private person. And I it's scary, isn't it? I don't want people knowing how much money I'm worth. It's just... it's not fucking violins out for Gary, but I've given up a lot for this. I can't have my privacy. Everyone knows who I am. If I'm in this country, I'm in a room, somebody knows who I am, and that's never anything that I wanted. And I just, you go on Piers Morgan, the world's biggest dickhead. It's like, tell me private information about yourself. Tell me, fuck off, Piers. You know what I mean? And I don't want to set a precedent where people can just like fucking ask me personal shit. It's... And it's as I say, the thing is, I went on Piers Morgan last year, and in my personal opinion, I fucking killed it. And I wasn't tired then. And it was just, you go in on charisma. Piers Morgan is school ground bullying, right? That's what it is. And, I was never a bully. I can bounce, you know what I mean, if I have to. And, you watched me on Piers Morgan last year, and it was funny. And I went on today, and I knew I was knackered. And I was, the other day, and I knew I was knackered. And I said to the PR, like, these guys want to break my fucking legs, and I'm tired. And I was like, yeah, I'm better than them. They're fucking dickheads, but... It's scary. Listen, if I'm totally honest, I think Farage's going to win the next election. And I don't know how bad that's going to be. And I think after Farage, something comes that's worse than Farage. Realistically, Aaron, what does that mean for me and for you? This is not a joke.
I agree.
It's not a game, right? You know what I mean? And, I know you've faced violence in the streets. You know what I mean? Which like touch wood, that's never happened to me, right? I don't enjoy this level of, like, public... visibility. Obviously now I'm in the middle of a big press campaign and I'm all over the fucking internet and I don't like it. It scares me and it makes me feel uncomfortable. I told you, like, I would like to have kids one day. This genuinely has genuine potential to jeopardize the safety of my children, Aaron. That is where I am, right? And I am a rich person, and I was a rich person, and I could have been rich and anonymous, and I've chosen to do this. And yeah, I know I've used my personal story and whatever, I'm fucking bombastic, whatever, and it's part of the game. I don't want to do it, and that's why I want to see more influencers. I want to listen, I've taken my part of the Gary Stevenson show, so like, it doesn't have to be you, Aaron. I want to see more people stepping up, because it's not just me. It's, when they're shooting back, I don't want it to be just my fucking head above the sandbags. You know what I mean? You know, we fight this, but we fight this together.
The point about the far right, and I agree with you. No, for me, Farage is synonymous with a certain political tendency you can see in continental Europe, which is actually quite old. You know, it goes back quite a long time. Restore is, you know, different. It's kind of more identitarian, Front National kind of politics. And I do kind of think, you know, I said it to Michael recently. You know Michael very well.
Yeah, of course.
He's just so calm.
Yeah.
You know, I said I'm starting to think probably in the next 10 years we're going to start, and I don't think it'll happen in Britain, but we're going to start to see political assassinations on both people on the left and the right in Europe. I think we're going to see that because of polarization, changing media structures, inequality, and that's a really scary thing. You know, and I even in the 2008 to sort of 2015 anti-austerity movement, you knew there'd be violence or people go to prison, but I didn't really think like that, and now I kind of do. And I think it's really important, you know, to obviously minimise the possibility of that. But it is a very, very concerning thing. And you said about what happens if Reform win. You know, it's very possible. It's very, very possible that this channel doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah,
I'm Novara Media is driven out of business. Gary Stevenson is debanked.
Yeah,
it's very, very possible.
These things.
This
happen,
is politics.
You know?
It's happened many times before, right?
Yeah. These
much
things
worse.
Happen. Yeah, you know, my nan was driven out of the country she was born in, and her parents as well. It happens. You know, it happens. So just like help us, not just you, but the viewers. Like, you know, yeah, all right. You know, obviously I'm a fucking millionaire and I can afford to do this. It's not a Marvel movie. You know, I don't come and people message me, oh, can we help? And I really appreciate that. This is not the Gary Stevenson show. You know, I do my bit and I work fucking hard for this, you know. If enough of us fight, we will win. If it's just me, you know, if it's just 10 of us, if it's just me and you, we're not going to win. You know, this is about how many of the public who may not consider themselves to be on the left, who may not consider themselves to be politicised. You know, this is Camus in The Plague, you know. This will be won or lost based on whether ordinary men and women are willing to get their heads down and fight, you know, in whatever way they can. You know, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, obviously I know we have platforms and people don't. The people watching this now, I want them to understand, they are not people in the stands. They are people on the field. You know, the people who are supposed to fix this, I guarantee you they're not going to fix this. And the fire engines are not coming. Yeah. It will come down to the ordinary men and women of this country and on other countries, whether they will support people like me, build things, you know, spread ideas in their community. We are all participants. And we will determine how this ends up.
Gary, we'll leave it there, mate.
Thank you very much.
Fabulous talking to you. Thanks for coming on Downstream.
No worries. Glad to be back. All good.